Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi Isai. This is Rabbi Yehuda Levin, and the program is the Parshas, heard now each and every Wednesday evening at 8 o'clock for 13 powerful minutes of Torah Hashkafa. This week's program is Parshas Toldos Tovshin Ayin Beis. I'm your host, Rabbi Yehuda Levin, and if I had to give a title to this episode, I would call it The Emperor Has No Clothes. I had occasion to listen this Monday evening for part of Dr. Gelman's program. He was talking about all the corruption that exists in the American situation, in American politics, in the American programs, and that everybody is on the take, and that we could solve our economic problems if we could get rid of all the genevas that are going on every level of government, the judiciary, and with all the programs and all the special interest groups. Rabbi say, how many of us gave thought to the fact that what Dr. Gelman was expressing about American society is hashkafically a reflection of what goes on in the most important chelik of society, the Haredi community, that is supposed to be the Avdei Hashem, and that we suffer from the exact same problem, that the emperor has no clothes, and that there's a tremendous amount of corruption in various aspects of our society, but we continue to fiddle on, dance the night away without acknowledging. Our music at our chasnas, if our parents or grandparents from the 1950s and 60s would walk into a chasna today, they would be shocked and perhaps even outraged that this is the Yiddish music and this is the decibel level of the music that is ushering into the chasna and kala, to the night of all nights, to the Leil HaChuppah, and to the Leil HaNisuin, and to the Leil HaZivug. And what about the Fresarai? The constant assault of the food and wine ads, despite the economic downturn. That's no problem. Just keep on zalfing. New products and more sugar. The kids get diabetes at a younger age, but that doesn't mean anything. And what about the constant Haredi light magazines, the throwaways, the giveaways, and everything else that advertise the long sheitlach and the hair-like sheitlach, and the crazy kinds of clothing, and the druggy type models they show wearing these garish clothing to affect the psyche of the Jewish woman of the purchases. But that's okay. And what about the homosexualization of society, which is actually Amolek, Asher Korcha Baderech, Loshen Keri Mishkav Zohar? And what about the continuing molestations? No problem. It's business as usual. Everything just keeps on going. Everything just keeps on going. Business as usual, with no concern for the impact that it's having. And then we wonder why there's more and more molestations. And what about the constant kissing up to the politicians? And yes, the band plays on. It's just business as usual. The emperor seemingly has no clothing. My dear friends, it's true that there's tremendous chesed in our community. That chesed that's done in unbelievable proportions and amounts is truly a lifesaver for Klal Yisrael. And also it's true that maybe there was never such a broad-based bastion of Limud HaTorah, of people of all ages, and of all of our children going to yeshiva, even from the poorest families, and so many of our girls aspiring to marry kollel couple, to be a part of a kollel couple. That's all true. But the bottom line is the hashchasa is still unbelievable. Let me give you an example. Of the Muncie lesbian. That's right. At this late stage, in the aftermath of the passage of same-gender marriage in New York State, and the continuing discovery of more and more molestations and more molesters being uncovered, even at this late stage, even 2 years after Dov Heikind amassed, 2 years ago practically, he amassed 960 molestees and 60 molesters, and that was only locally in the Brooklyn, Queens area. I don't think he went all around the world. Certainly he didn't get even a large fraction, a large percentage of the total population. And yet it continues and continues, and we hear story after story. And in Monsey, Eretz Simchas Torah, they finally arrested a guy named Moshe Turner, a molester, a danger, a sakana. And there was this lesbian, Eisenpress, who was running in a primary for family court judge for a 10-year term in Monsey, family court. 30 Rabbanim signed the Kol Korah that it's Das Torah, you're not allowed to vote for her. She won the primary, and then, shortly before the election, after Sukkot, the Askanim managed to get that Rabbi Leibish Rottenberg of Kosny in Monsey hosted a meeting of many prominent rabbis, Rabbanim, including Rabbi Yisrael Hager, son of the Vizhnitzer Rebbe, and the so-called, or the currently called, I should say, Satmar Rebbe of Monsey, Rabbi Halberstam, amongst others. And I don't know if they actually interviewed or they heard Edus from or about this lesbian, that she left the gay and lesbian organization at a certain point, and she ruled against them at one point. Shtusim v'havalim. Could you imagine you would tell Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Rav Yoel Teitelbaum, Ehrliche Yidden, as I say, the Gedolim of yesteryear, Rav Avigdor Miller, the Amolik, the Friedrich Kashev, the Debretziner, that Rabbanim, who can't find the time to meet on so many pressing issues for Klal Yisrael. How many times here did they meet? They managed to get together to meet, to what? To don up Das Torah, if you're allowed to vote for this lesbian for family court judge. A woman, not the two, but a lesbian. Could you imagine? Is there any way to explain this in the aftermath of all that has happened? You have to say that there's no siyata dishmaya anymore. The cravenness, the running after money and power is so much. At the highest echelons of our own community, our Torah, so-called Torah leadership. Then there are foolish people who believe the American myth of Das Torah. Well, if they met, this must be Das Torah. One of the Rabbanim, I don't want to mention his name because he's supposed to be a Kanoy and Mishichva Mulamala of some of these political rabbis. But he's at least a two-time loser at these meetings. Years ago when they met with that lowlife assemblyman from Monsey, whose name escapes me, that again, they also made a capitulation, even though he supported the Mishkav Zachor agenda. They said they support him because he promised to listen to the Rabbanim. And this rabbi went there and he made a Chilul Hashem by participating and by not standing up and screaming against this. And now this same rabbi had them go and bang on the table in visions on election day that he removes his name from the Isser, whether or not he's set to vote against her or not. I mean, totally losing it, Rabbi Sai. This is not Das Torah. And anybody who blindly follows this is going to have to give a din v'cheshbon for stupidity. This is not what Das Torah is all about. This is ridiculous. This is what losing our total hashkafa, losing our simple siyata dishmaya. When I made a few months ago, I made a video in the aftermath of the earthquake in New York. I read from the art scroll who quoted the Orach Chaim in Vayikra about I will act with you Bekeri, just like you act with me, that things are coincidental and happenstance. And the Orach Chaim says that when I send you a message and you don't read the message properly, then I send you another message of a punishment. You don't read that properly. It gets harder and harder for you to see. Rabbi Say from Monsey, after the earthquake and after the hurricanes and after all the molestation and after the Kosim Ksubal Zachar, and if the Moshe Turner, right before you still are meeting and ultimately give enough neshek, whether you came out and endorsed the lesbian or not, that the activists, so-called Askanim, should be able to go and say, yeah, you can vote for the lesbian. Shumu Shamayim. This is not going to have a cause and effect of more molestation, of more corruption. This is what's going on here, Rabbi Sai. Does Hashem have nachas from this meeting? Ask yourself, is this good or bad? Business as usual. Any wonder there's a continuing increase in molestations? Rabbi Sai, Motzei Shabbos, I heard the program on Zev Brenner to discuss molestations and what the rabbis are and aren't doing in the book of this Dr. Salman. Dr. Salman was very good when he was allowed to speak. Tzvi Gluck got on and said I give him the greatest credit. He spoke about the fact that there are cover-ups and that there are problems and that there are feet stuck out in the way to trip up people, askalim, who are trying to do things, and kids are suffering. And you know who was totally a repetitive waste of time, who was not prepared and who was embarrassing? It was like chalk screeching on a blackboard. It was Rabbi Frankfurt of Ami Magazine. He was totally unprepared and just lumped in Dr. Salman automatically with anti-Haredi forces without reading the book. Finally, an hour into the program, he apologizes. But whenever he thought, aha, it's a gotcha moment, I think I have a steer in Dr. Salman, who we barely allowed to speak, he'd jump in again and start attacking him. And it was really pathetic. And again, the same thing ad nauseum, totally forgetting, almost Alzheimer-like, forgetting his previous apology, then apologizing again, assuring us he's for reporting. And this scenario repeated itself again and again ad nauseum, where Rabbi Frankfurter actually was preventing us through his schizophrenic, sophomoric, unprepared, unfocused presentation. Frankly, he was a great time waster who prevented us from listening to Dr. Salman or Mr. Gluck more, or Rabbi Gluck or whatever, Tzvi Gluck, and learning more what we can do in a practical way. Finally, the caller Esther said one of the Rabbi Frankfurt's big defenses, like the great white help, he's defending the Fruma community from the terrible attack of the bloggers, and automatically Dr. Salman, who helps many Yidden escape from the effects of the molestation and become normalized and helps the families. Finally, Esther asks him, your taina to Dr. Salman is, the big question is whether percentage-wise there are more molestations in the Orthodox community or not. And Dr. Salman, here's the only mistake he made, insisting that according to the CDC and what he thinks, there's probably the same or even a little less. And what if there's more? And what if there's more? So then what? So the answer is, even if there's more in the Jewish community, since when do we compare ourselves to the lowest common denominator of the secular community? This was a terrible point, and hashkafically, I would like to tell you that there probably is more. I think Dr. Susan Schulman perhaps said that there's more molestations in the Orthodox community. How could it be? Well, part of it is we lose this in hashkafa, Dr. Rabbi Frankfurter. We lose the siyata dishmaya. We lose the siyata dishmaya of preventing our kids from being impurified because of what we do to chanfa, to kiss up to the politicians. Rabbi Frankfurter, in the 80s, I spoke to the rabbis, to the leading rabbis of Torah Messiah. And since that time, for 20 or 25 years after that, until they finally send out letters to the camps, they knew about the manduras, they knew about the cocoa. Nothing was done, Rabbi Frankfurter. If the proper things that are done now in the last year or two were done, maybe we wouldn't have this. So please grow up, get your facts straight. This is Rabbi Yehuda Levin, Guten Tamid.